All right, we are on the air. Greetings, everyone. Great to see you all here tonight. We've got nice full room, it feels like. So you've spread out back and forth so it doesn't feel like we're tipping to one side or the other. That's good. That's good. Well, tonight is class 99. We have one more class next week before we take our long hiatus. And next week, the lesson will be a real surprise. It was a surprise to me as I was looking at next week's and prepping a little. I'm like, oh, wow, that's different. Okay, so that's all I'm going to tell you. I'll leave you with that. You know, it's good to be surprised, right? But tonight we are going to continue on in the story of the book of Acts, but we're jumping to the end of Acts. So last week we kind of went out of sequence with the book a little bit because it just wanted me to show you a couple maps and say, there you go, we're good. So we went ahead and did Acts 15. Today we're going to jump forward to Acts 27, all the way through that chapter to 28:16. So this is Paul's journey to Rome. And this is not his first missionary journey per se. This is not set up as that. This is when Paul, who had been held in Caesarea, who had been questioned by the governors there, Felix and Festus, and he had spent time there about 2 years waiting to get his trial stuff done, and he finally said, I appeal to Caesar. And as a Roman citizen, he had the right to do that. And so Rome then said, great, you've appealed to Caesar you're going to go. And so they said, send him. We're going to go with it. So they have to get him then to Rome. The most logical manner, the most logical way they would do it is by boat. Now, what plays into this story today, and we're going to see it mentioned a couple times, is the time of year this is taking place. Because sailing on the Mediterranean at the time of Paul is much different than it is today. Today we get in big boats that are the size of, length that are more of a football field and 6 stories high and have amusement parks on them. And they have tens of thousands of horsepower of engine behind them, and they just go ahead and push on through the water and cut through the waves, and they don't care. When you talk about the time of Paul, they were much smaller vessels that were very dependent upon weather and wind. And so as the season grew colder and as it got deeper into the season, it made it virtually impossible for them to go against the winds to try to get west going into like Italy or something like that to go to Rome. It also made it very difficult even to go east because the winds were so strong. And so shipping was very much a seasonal type thing. But they found Paul passage, and that's where we're going to pick up today, is seeing how they were going to get him to Rome by boat as they started this process. So in Acts 27 it says, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. So you will see in this story, this is of course Luke, traveling with Paul, going. So as the writer of this, he's going to do a lot of, we went and did this, we went here, we sailed here, we got wrecked here, whatever. So that's the we that we are talking about here. So he was assigned to a guard, to a centurion, who was going to oversee, him and his men were going to oversee this process of transporting not only Paul, but other prisoners that were going to be taken to Rome. So Paul wasn't the only one that was being shipped here. It was a group of prisoners that they put him with and said, all these guys are going to Rome, let's go ahead and send them. So it's kind of like they sent him UPS. They told him, you're going to Rome, and they set him over here in this cell, and when we get that cell full, then we'll send you. But we're not going to take a truck out just for you. So sit over here and wait for a little while. Finally, they got enough people, so they put the centurion with them, and they sent them on their way. And it says, we boarded a ship from there, Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, bad night for this, was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From there we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because of the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. So you can kind of see this. They went up the coast from Caesarea, and they went on up, and they went to Sidon. They went across to Cyprus. They went around, and they were just kind of following around the interior side of the Mediterranean Sea till they got up Cyprus, went around, kind of went down around the bottom of it, had to go across some open sea, but they're really being cautious. When you think about sailing from Israel today to Italy, they didn't just go, let's go across. They had to think of ports that they could have the boat serviced and get supplies and stuff as they needed. Also, not going out too far out into the sea, because they didn't want to get caught in some kind of a storm or something. So they were doing little jumps, and they were staying close to the sea so they could kind of keep an eye on the shore. They could kind of see where they were going. They kind of knew their bearings with it, and they could just kind of bump their way across. And it says, we made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. It says, when the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salamon. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous, because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also. So they put this reference in there. Again, we got a calendar reference, which kind of tells us what's going on. It's after the Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement generally falls somewhere end of September, early part of October. So we kind of know the season. It was about this time of year. Not quite this late, but it was getting there. And so winter is coming on. And Paul looks at them and says, you know, guys, don't mean to be a smarty pants here, but this might be a good place to stay, because you don't travel in the winter when you start having storms come across the Mediterranean. So he says, I think that if we go from here, it's going to bring great loss to ship and cargo, and possibly even our own lives. So you may want to think about just hanging out. And it says, but the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship, who, of course, wanted to make one more run to Rome. And it's like, I think we can make it. Go ahead and load my ship up. I think we can do it. I think I can make one more payday before this storm season really sets in. So, yeah, we can do it. It'll be fine. So the centurion listened to them instead of listening to Paul, who's saying, guys, this isn't really a good idea. It would be better for us to hold back. But it says, since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. So they said, maybe you're right, we're not going to make it to Rome, but we can make one more jump. Better harbor, better for the ship. We can stay there for the winter, wait for something better to come along. It'll be fine. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest, so they could go either way in and out of it. And it says, when a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity. Oh, look, the weather's changed. I think we can make it. You know, if any of them had grown up in Nebraska or Iowa, they'd realize that the weather change means nothing because it can be exactly opposite tomorrow. But they went, oh, I think this is a great deal. We're going to have this nice season come in. We got a nice, gentle, southerly breeze. This is going to take us right up along the coast we need to go. Let's go for it. So it says, so they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called a northeaster, swept down from the island. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure, so the men hoisted it aboard. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. So they're literally tying the boat to make sure that it doesn't flex in the waves. And so they would put ropes all the way around, cinch them down, and that would hold the kind of help with the integrity of the ship. And they said, this is not good. We can't even secure the lifeboats anymore. We can't secure the ship. Let's lock it down the best we can. We're going to have to ride this out. This is because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. Okay, Paul said, if you do this, it's going to be a great loss of cargo. Well, they're chucking it overboard now. It says on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. They're throwing everything they can off this boat. Then it says, when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and the storm continued raging, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. Again, this is a neat little phrase that goes in here, but the fact that they couldn't see stars or sun or anything else means they couldn't navigate. They've now drifted away from the islands. They're now not near any body of land that they can identify, and they have no stars. And the sun's not even really shining to get a good bearing on, so they have no idea where they are in the Mediterranean Sea. That's a pretty good spot on the map to sit there and go, I wonder where. And so all they know is they're being driven by the sea, but they don't know for sure where they're at. So it says, after they had gone a long time without food, Paul stood up before them and said, men, you should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. I don't want to say I told you so, but I told you so. Yeah, you should have listened. But you made your choice. Then it says, then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. And this is where Paul comes in, and he's not just saying, man, if you'd have listened to me, we wouldn't be in this mess, blah, 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 blah. He came up and he said, I told you, but go ahead and take courage. You're going to lose the ship, but have courage. And Paul has an opportunity here, and the Lord gives him an opportunity to encourage the people and to give them strength in this time of turmoil. I mean, literally, not just figuratively, in the raging sea. And their life is being tossed and turned and twisted, and they have no hope for being saved at this point. And Paul says, there is hope. So he goes on and it says, only the ship will be destroyed. Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. He says, you're going to Rome. So don't be afraid, because you are going to go to Rome. So be ready for that. And then it says, and God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. So not only you are going to be spared, Paul, but everybody else with you. And we're going to find out here in a few minutes that that is not a small number. This is not just a couple guys out on a little yacht. This is a very large crew. And he says, God is going to spare them all. This is a testimony for Paul to be able to give to them. And God is showing himself in the midst of this certain disaster. And he gives Paul this message through a messenger, through an angel, and says, go and speak to these people, because watch what I'm going to do. And so God is able to prove himself through the most difficult time that these guys probably have had to face. And they're thinking, we're all dead. We don't survive this. Maybe one or two of us, maybe a few of us, but we're not getting out of this. And Paul says, that's not what God told me. He sent a messenger and said, not one of you are going to be lost. So it says, keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. Nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. It says, on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. That when about midnight, the sailors sensed they were approaching land. Now, how they sensed it, I don't know for sure, but they sensed they were approaching land. And it says they took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found that it was 90 feet deep. So they are heading for land. The shore is coming. The ground is getting shallower, or the water's getting shallower as they go forward. They know it's coming. It's night. There's no stars. They don't know for sure what direction they're going. All they know is they are going pretty quick at something, and they can't see it. It says, fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved. He said, remember God's promise? That's here. You get in the lifeboat, you're on your own. And so, if you want the guarantee, you better stay here, because this is where God's blessing is going to be seen. So it says, so the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. So this is 14 days they've been going through this torment, this torrent, whatever you want to call it, of not knowing what's going to happen. And finally, Paul tells them, cut the lifeboat. I'm sure that was difficult for the soldiers to do, because somehow that looks like it may be an escape. But Paul's saying, don't put your trust in that. Put your trust in the Lord. If you jump in what you think looks safe, you're going to die. Don't get in that boat. It ain't going to withstand this. Stay here, even though you think there's no hope, and trust in the Lord like I am, and you're going to be fine. So they took that little leap of faith by cutting the rope, letting the lifeboat go. We're staying here. We're trusting Paul. We're trusting what you're doing. Then he said, eat. You guys have been worried about this for 14 days, and I'm sure a lot of them have been green from the tossing and turning of the waves. And he said, you may not feel much like it, but eat. You haven't eaten anything substantial for 14 days. You haven't eaten anything. You've taken nothing in. You cannot go on like this. And so he says, go ahead and eat. And it says, now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. You're going to need your strength. We're not out of this yet. And so he says, you're going to live, you're going to survive, but you're going to need to eat. You're going to have to nourish yourself so we can do this. So he encourages them, and it says, not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. Okay, pretty good promise. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Great statement right there. Paul not only has the opportunity to say, God spoke to me in this dream through this angel, but put your faith in him and trust in him. And then when he told everybody, it's time for you to eat. And so the first thing Paul did is took bread and he broke it and gave thanks. He gave thanks to God because he knew that God was with him. He knew God's promises, and he knew God. And so when he took the bread, his natural instinct is to say, thank you, God, for this bread, for this food, that you're still with me. You've got this. And so it's a huge testimony to the people around him. In the midst of this storm, Paul's going to take time to pray. In the midst of, we don't know what's going to happen next. We could hit shore at any time. Great. I'm going to take time to pray. I want people to understand who is driving us and delivering us in this case. So he does that. It says, then he broke it and he began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. Not a tiny ship. 276 men on there. And they took the grain that they had in the cargo hold. They threw most of the cargo over, but they had grain and stuff in this ship, and they baked bread with it. They made bread. They made food. They ate it. And when they had all eaten, all 276 of them, then it says, when they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. Everybody full? Good. Throw all the grain over now. We need to make the ship as light as we can because this ain't going to be pretty. We're going to land, but you may not like it. But we're going to get there. And so they threw the grain into the sea, and it says, when daylight came, they did not recognize the land. But they saw a bay with a sandy beach where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. So they had everything strapped down, everything tied down. They were just at the mercy of what was going on. They threw out the sea anchors so that if they got close enough to shore, hopefully they would catch first and stop them from running ashore. Once it became daylight, they could see the land they're heading at. They don't know what it is, but they can at least see it. And they went, hey, look, there's a river. There's a little bay, an inlet. Let's head for that. That's probably going to be the softest landing we're going to get. So let's head for that deal. So they cut the anchors loose. They cut the rudders loose. They try to steer the ship the best they could. They're probably picking up some pretty good speed at this point because everything's been cut loose. It's light. They probably put up a sail to get them in there. Let's go for it. And when they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach, but the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. Dang it. They didn't see that one in there, and so they ran the ship aground before they could even get to land. But the sea was so strong that it says, the bow struck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. So they're thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. We're just going to run it right up here in this little bay, and everything's going to be grand. And then they hit the sandbar, and the ship started to destroy itself. The surf was just beating against the back of it. They couldn't move. They couldn't get it off the sandbar. So there they are, just letting this stuff go in. So it says the soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. Now remember, we talked about this when Peter was released from prison, when Paul and Silas got out of prison, when all these people got out. The guards that are put in charge of the prisoners, if the prisoners escape, the guards basically take their punishment. They will be put to death. So the guards saying, well, we can't let these guys start jumping overboard because once they hit the water, they're gone. They're going to swim away. And then we're going to wind up with no prisoners, and we can't go back to Rome because if we do, they're going to say, where's your prisoner? And when we say, I don't know, then they're going to put us to death. So the guards figured the best thing for us to do, go ahead and kill them on the ship, and then we'll get to shore. So that's their initial plan. And it says, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. He said, if you can swim, go. If you can't swim, there's enough debris coming. Grab a piece of something that falls off and hope it takes you to shore. There it is. And it says, in this way, everyone reached land safely. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. And the islanders showed us unusual kindness. So they land on a friendly beach. They get there. People are taking care of them. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. It says Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper driven out by the heat fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, this man must be a murderer. For though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live. So they said, see, you can't escape justice. The goddess Justice has watched what you've done. Even though you survived that shipwreck, you're not getting away with what you've done. You must be a murderer or something bad, because that snake was in there waiting for you and it got you. Karma. That's the way their mentality was. That's what they're thinking about. They're thinking of these mythical gods. And they said, Paul must be hated by this God, or this God is after them. Paul has just explained to them who the true God is and who saved their life and brought them in from this big shipwreck. And now the islanders are going, oh no, here's the God that's going to get him. Because Paul's God brought him on shore, but the goddess Justice prevailed. And so he's got a viper on his hand. He's going to die. It says, but Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead. Let's watch him. And they're waiting for him just to keel over. And it says, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Well, if the god Justice or the goddess Justice couldn't get him, it's because he himself must be a god. Because otherwise, that viper, we know that viper, it's poisonous. You're dropping dead in minutes. And he's still alive. So he himself must be a god, and they look to him with that kind of a glory type thing. And it says there was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official in the island. He welcomed us to his home and showing us generous hospitality for 3 days. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him, and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to set sail, they furnished us with the supplies that we needed. After 3 months, we put out to sea in a ship that had wintered in the island. It was an Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods Castor and Pollux. We put in at Syracuse and stayed there 3 days. From there, we set sail and arrived at Rhegium. The next day, the south wind came up, and on the following day, we reached Puteoli. There, we found some brothers and sisters who invited us to spend a week with them. And so we came to Rome. The brothers and sisters there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. At the sight of these people, Paul thanked God and was encouraged. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed to live by himself with a soldier to guard him. So Paul, when he had this opportunity, they tried to make him a god because he was able to shake off that snake, but instead he took the opportunity to go and to heal other people, not to bring glory to himself, not for people to look at him, but for him to be able to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and to be able to tell the people who God really was, what God really was healing people and who protected him. So he took the opportunity to do that. Once he started on his way, he was blessed again, not because of who he was, but because of the God that he served. And when he got to Rome, they said, okay, you can go live by yourself, but we're going to have a guard stay and watch you. So Paul is on house arrest in Rome. He's made it to Rome. That was Paul's intent all along. His intent was, I want to get to Rome so I can preach the gospel of Christ there. That was his whole journey from coming from Caesarea, and this entire ship ride and shipwreck and everything else that took months and was perilous, and he could have, lost his life many times, but it was so that he could get to the next place that God had told him, you will go and preach the gospel there. And he just gave everything up to reach that final goal. So this is his first, it's not a missionary journey, but Paul makes everything a missionary journey. Paul doesn't take a journey without telling someone about Christ, and this is no exception to that. It's not really considered his first journey that way, but it was because he went to preach the gospel. And it's really not even his first journey. He'd taken the missionary journeys prior to this. But this is when he was trying to get to Rome finally so that he could preach that gospel there. So he goes there again because it's an open opportunity for him to meet the Christians that are there and to preach the gospel there. So, all right. Questions or comments? I guess we could say goodbye to the people at home. Mm-hmm. He was, yeah. The poor guys, I shouldn't say poor guys, the lucky guys that were guarding him, they got to hear the gospel. I'll guarantee it. But, yep. So he could live by himself, but he had to have a soldier to guard him. And so. Yeah, that's true. But they didn't know whether they were on an island or whether on mainland. And yeah, I'm sure they could have figured out ways to cover their tracks and say, oh yeah, they died there. But, that was their first thought was, let's just kill the prisoners here and not worry about it. Makes it easier for us. We don't have to watch them. We don't have to pay attention to them. But again, the centurion had seen what Paul had done, the wisdom that he had shown and the grace that he had shown through this thing, and said, no, let's keep him around. And so spared the lives of the other prisoners there as well. But like I said, this was not Paul's first or only journey, but this is a journey that he took. And he was going to Rome because, again, it's about spreading the gospel. He was going to stand before Caesar. He was going to go and preach the gospel. So, all right. Well, with that, we're going to say goodbye to the people at home, and we're going to start into our time of questions and stuff if anybody has them or statements or whatever. So thank you for joining us online. For those of you who did, we hope to see you Sunday. If you can, come see us in person.